Good morning, good afternoon, good day. I was going to say good night, but that just sounds really weird to start a podcast off with saying good night to everybody.
On a strong start there, Richard. On a strong start.
But that's covered pretty much every potential time zone that we're in. Welcome to episode 1 of Cloudy with a Chance of Insights. At least we're hoping that there'll be some insights as we go through the course of the show. For anybody in the Microsoft world, it has been an interesting week because we had Microsoft Ignite last week, which I was fortunate enough to be able to attend in person. There are some drawbacks to that, which we'll cover off in a bit. And obviously, there was a whole raft of announcements that came out from there, primarily obviously around AI. Interestingly, certainly from my perspective, and I think from Cyrus's perspective, security was well up in that list of sort of priorities and announcements, and we'll cover some of those off in a bit. So rolling on to Ignite, as I said, I was lucky enough to go, but unfortunately, I'm not sure that Cyrus and David know this, but I was scheduled to fly out on Monday, but American Airlines had a problem with the plane. In fact, part of the wing fell off on the way into Heathrow.
No.
So they had to replace that part, and because this event is so rare, they didn't actually have a replacement part anywhere in the UK. So they had to manufacture it, ship it to Heathrow, fit it, and obviously test it. At least I'm hoping they tested it. Which the end result was that the flight was cancelled. No available flights out of the UK to Chicago, even via New York or I don't know, LA or something. Yeah. So the upshot of that is I flew out on Tuesday, which means that I was somewhere over the Atlantic whilst the keynote was going on.
Oh, how disappointing, Richard.
Weirdly, I did actually manage to catch some of it because the chap in the seats in front of me was watching it on his mobile. But I refused to give American any extra money to access their Wi-Fi. So I landed around about 3:00 on the Tuesday, which meant I missed all the important sessions of this. And I spent the next 2 days basically covering basically working there as opposed to doing anything else. So meeting clients and suppliers, etc. So unfortunately, I did miss out on possibly all of the benefits of being there, apart from the free rucksack and the drinks bottle, and a few other swag from the stands. But one thing that I took away from that event, and I thought this is interesting, and this is purely from me being on the sort of the show floor, whatever you want to call it, the exhibitor floor, is the focus on 2 or 3 key sort of areas. And if I look at the way that the partner, certainly ecosystem was set up, obviously Copilot was a big thing there, but it was more about, okay, how do we extend it and how do we scale it and how do we manage it? So it's that whole sort of compliance management layer around the AI. So if we're creating custom Copilots, how do we make sure we've got some sort of layer of governance control over that, and people aren't allowed to just go and create a Copilot wherever they want to? Security was a big piece, and again that was split fairly evenly between sort of data security and what we would call threat management. So the sort of SIM type tools, so Sentinel, but also Cisco were there with Splunk, Palo Alto were there with their products, and there was a couple of others at Fortinet as well. So it's an interesting sort of split between that, and then obviously the more traditional sort of DevSecOps, custom application, migration pieces, etc. So it's an interesting split, and certainly the previous ones I've been to, I don't think the security story was as prominent as it was in this one. And then the Microsoft area as well. So the way that Ignite was basically set up in the floor was that you had sort of the partner ecosystems on the sides, and then in the middle you had the sort of Microsoft area, which was, the sort of the black belts and SMEs around, M365 Copilot or GitHub Copilot or Security Copilot and other areas as well. And certainly the main focus, I think, for the attendees was that sort of area. And you were able to have some really quite useful conversations with some of the Microsoft people that were sat there. But anyway, that was my Ignite experience. Oh, apart from the fact it snowed on the Thursday, and then it took me almost 2 and a bit hours to get from the McCormack Centre to the airport. I think we averaged probably, certainly for the first hour and a half, about 3 miles an hour to get out of Chicago in the snow. And I thought it was just the UK that did that, but apparently it's countries that they're used to the snow as well.
Oh, amazing. And Richard, I guess, you mentioned you're on the stand, and that's a tough job at the best of times. What was the sort of conversations you were hearing from customers? Were they echoing and mirroring kind of the whole security thing? Now, I know you're security primarily, but interesting to hear the themes.
It was interesting because, obviously I need to be very careful about not sort of pushing the IBM piece here, because, as I said, disclaimer, we are all IBM employees. This is not an IBM sponsored podcast by any shape or means or forms, and any opinions expressed by us do not reflect IBM's. So that's the legal bits out of the way. It was interesting because I think that a lot of the Copilot announcements are just enhancements on what was already there. So things like the agents within SharePoint, for example. The term grounding came out quite a lot, which I don't think we use that much within IBM, but certainly it's a phrase that they use within Microsoft quite a lot to sort of constrain and control the sort of data that gets presented back to the user, for want of a better word. But yes, security came up quite a bit because there is a concern. I've spoken to a number of organizations around, hang on a second, we've never really bothered too much with data security. We know it's there. We just sort of rely on the permission model, and we don't, worry too much about labeling or, the older sort of IRM type scenarios that I think Cyrus might mention a little bit later on around sort of purview and DLP, etc. But there is a concern, and I'm not sure how justified this concern is, that as soon as we deploy M365 Copilot or another Copilot that is pointing, for want of a better word, at the data that's in that state, that suddenly people are going to be writing prompts that, whether on purpose or just accidentally because of the way they've structured the prompt, will surface information up that, to be fair, they probably already had access to, but they wouldn't necessarily have gone and searched specifically for that document or that content type.
Yeah, reminds me of the Delve debacle when that
precisely. Delve. Both me and David were working at Microsoft at the time that Delve was released, and the amount of times I had to go into clients and explain what Delve was doing. And for those that don't know, because Delve is 10, 12 years old, possibly even longer. And does it still exist? I know we've switched it off, but I think it might still exist. But basically, it was just like a serendipitous data discovery tool, which sort of showed you that, colleague X has worked on this document. You might be interested in this document, or colleague Y has posted X onto SharePoint, and it sort of surfaced it up. So it gave you that serendipitous sort of discovery to say, oh, my colleagues are doing all this. And that caused two problems. One is that you had a whole organization structure there. So things like, you had your manager, your direct reports, your peers. All of those were sort of built into a graph. Probably shouldn't use that term to indicate it. And that caused problems because people had never set their AD up to do this properly. The amount of people I went in and they basically had a flat AD with no sort of hierarchies around sort of employee structure, which meant that you sort of the whole organization's data. And then you had the bit, well, hang on a second, why can he see this or why can she see that? That shouldn't be there. And this, it's because people have put things in OneDrive and they've just done the default share with everyone, or, SharePoint sites have just been set up with the default, share internally sort of settings by default, and no one's bothered to go and do anything with it. That problem is going to be exacerbated with Copilot, I think, because, as I said, you can innocently write a query that you're thinking is just targeting some small subset of the data, and then suddenly you're going to get information coming back from elsewhere, depending on how the graph retrieves the data, so the permissions that you have, but also how the large language model manipulates that prompt to grab that data. So I think it's interesting, and certainly I reckon a good third of the security partners that were in Ignite were focusing on that data security piece. So how do we easily do that? So Varonis were there, and that's all they pretty much do is that DLP sort of piece. And I think that's an interesting challenge for a lot of organisations, because it does stop you from adopting this. Now, whether it's a valid fear or whether it's just a bit of FUD, time will tell, I think. But certainly the C-suite is sort of a little bit reticent about rolling some of this out at scale, because they then go, right, oh my God, what are they going to be able to see and do? And that's just internal, let alone what they can think about if you start to expose this to partners or clients, etc.
Personal opinion. I think it's a valid fear when you see a consensus, when you see a big corporation agreeing on the same subject. For example, this is our personal opinion. I put also the stamp of for the legal team. But IBM used to say that before, if you want to enable AI within the corporation, you need to enable data governance throughout the whole organization to be sure that it can be used fairly, relevant for the client, and also in a secure way. Maybe you can talk about that now. You mentioned Purview, and I heard from different MVPs, I heard from different partners that actually the main subject, surprisingly, was Purview. And Microsoft, as they say, Purview is there. It was renamed to Purview like last year, I think. But it's still we don't have enough expertise to globally to play with the DLPs, the policies, etc. So it's vital to know how to use Purview before even engaging into the AI conversation. And one way to mitigate that was for Microsoft to reveal in Ignite their own DSPM. So we know the CSPM, Cloud Security Posture Management, how to make sure that everything run as it should be, having a holistic view on the workloads, on the asset, etc. So DSP is the same, is data security posture management, is to see where your data is, the movement of your data within the company, and if any secure assets is being used, transferred, etc. So, for example, in the preview they showed, and I really like that actually in one click, you can activate this CSPM. And if you're happy, we can talk about that now. I can let you finish your presentation, Richard.
Well, I'm not sure if it was really
because I can't really.
I just waffled on a little bit. No, I mean, it was interesting. I think that the keynote pulled out data as being one of the sort of key pieces going forward, especially around the sort of AI piece, and rightly so, because without the data, without the quality of data, certainly a lot of the Copilot tools will not work as effectively as they could do, and you won't get the benefit out of them. One of the things that I thought was interesting, and this is actually a complete tangent to a certain extent, is I can't remember what the product was called. They gave it a name, but it was basically a sort of ROI calculator for Copilot. So to give you some sort of baseline KPI about how much this has helped your organization in ROI. And I think that's going to be very, very important because we can roll this out, but unless we've got those metrics to look at it, it's very difficult to understand actually how that's being used. And then that ties in with the security piece to a certain extent, because if you just roll it out with, blankly and just say, hey, here's Copilot, go for it, are you going to get the same level of efficiency if you're going to get sort of, I was going to say inaccurate, that's not the right word, but sort of slightly wider type of results because you've got access to so much more data. If your data set is constrained to a certain extent by either your role or by your position in the company, however you might want to do it, then in theory, the results that you get back for the queries that you do should be more useful than if you've just got an access to a completely wide data set that covers everything that the organization is doing. So I think those two things should go hand in hand to help scale this. And I think that's the problem that Microsoft have got to face this year, is that there are organisations, and they gave a whole ream of names during the keynote and in the conference, where from Bayer to Lumen, I think Vodafone was pulled up, a couple of others, where they're actually doing some really, really quite interesting things with Copilot and with OpenAI. But it's for the majority of the organizations where they're just doing things like M365 Copilot, how do they validate that it's actually giving you any return on investment? And how do they make sure that people are actually using it in the right way? And I think that's a story that everybody's going to have to think about. Because otherwise, what will happen is Microsoft will sell the licenses, but no one will use them. It's the old M365 story where you go and use Exchange Online because everybody uses Exchange Online. But to get the value out of the E3, E5 licenses, you really need to be using SharePoint or OneNote, OneDrive. You have to be using one of the other 30 other tools that you get with, an E3, E5 license to really drive that ROI.
I think they do that also in preview for a Copilot for security when they start to send reports on how many times they saved, and you can then, for now, manually reuse that into an Excel spreadsheet and say, this is the average working hours price for our employees, and this is how much time they saved. Therefore, this is the cost we saved in the workforce, and then justify the SKUs.
Security Copilot is the bane of my existence at the moment, primarily because it doesn't work with an MSFT model, so you can't build it really realistically into your service.
No.
Now, hopefully, that's coming H1 next year. The other thing is the pricing model, because obviously it's a consumption-based piece as opposed to everything else, which is a license-based. And I think that the minimum that you end up having to spend is close to 100K a year.
Yes, free SKU.
For the minimum SKU that you need to basically run this. So that is a very important one to be able to actually, as you said, show that return on investment. Because otherwise, there's 100K that you get going out of your Azure subscription every year, with little benefit to say, actually, look, this is what it's saved us. Yes, you can go and get rid of some of your analysts and say, hey, look, we've saved because we've managed to, remove 2 or 3 analysts, and Security Copilot is picking up the slack. But is that really what we want to be doing? I don't think so. I think that's not the way to be looking at it.
Absolutely. The main critiques was that actually it was just giving feedbacks and being an assistant, and now it evolved to even create almost some sort of policy or code for you proactively. So that can eventually justify the cost in the US for a junior analyst that is 100K, but in Europe and the rest of the world, I doubt it. So I agree with you.
Excellent. Well, that's the sort of security pieces out of the way. I know that both you, David, and Cyrus, you had some areas that you wanted to pick up. We talked about them in the green room, some of them. As people have probably noticed, I did also manage to pick up a cold in the US. So apologies for drinking the orange during the session, but it is slightly helping. Anyway, over to you guys.
Go on, Cyrus. You go first.
I'll just finish with the DSPM part. DSPM existed before Microsoft announced it into the Ignite. It exists in IBM. There's a lot of the best page I've seen on DSPM online was an IBM page. It explains exactly what it is, why it's important, and how it integrates into the cyber kitchen defense in depth. The first level is the cloud identity, and the last one is the data, the one thing, the treasure you want to protect. So the good thing I've seen with the DSPM from Microsoft is it integrates perfectly within the environment. For example, we talk about CSPM, when you can see with Azure Arc, you can have a hybrid holistic view on all your assets, and you can even quickly, in the click or using graph, enabling security based on the recommendation, policies, etc. DSPM is the same. So if you're not a big fan of DLP policies, etc., you can see, for example, some important assets. Let's say a secret project was being copied into USB files. Then you can say, okay, I click on the recommendation, and you can see when a user, you can see all the email was sent. For example, if you use E5, that's the one I wanted to talk about. If you use E5 or you already have a footprint into Purview, DSPM already leverages all the signals, so all the log activities like email sent, as I said, if the labels was downgraded, file uploaded, printed, or copied into a USB file. If you see that, you can, instead of just watching it, in 1 or 2 clicks, just create a policy that will block this workflow and say, all this project, I don't want to authorize anyone to print it or copy to a USB file, or even uploading to a personal cloud storage space. So that's what personally interests me, because you can, in 1 or 2 clicks, enable that feature and then justify that actually you start to have like a footprint into the DSPM world, and even enable or engage into the data security team and and justify then the usage of Copilot and saying that actually now we have a holistic view on what's happening. And it's not only the DLP, it's also like we talked about earlier, different technologies. One of them is insider risk management, my favorite one. You have the score. You can see, for example, what happens exactly with these employees. If you have disgruntled employees, people on departure, they have a more higher risk score. And therefore, you can say, okay, for all these projects, I can see that actually there's a blind spot. And the DSPM will detect that blind spot, put it in your face, and you can quickly create all the policies to say, okay, now we covered, and having the reinsurance to use different technology. One of them is AI.
Very cool. Typical. Anything else?
There's a lot to say with the purview. I just censored myself because I know we're going to talk about different subjects. One of them is the thin client, and the purview and the DSPM can help into that usage. So they all interconnect, but I don't want to talk too much.
Oh, never talk too much. Never talk.
You can hear, for the audience, you can hear my accent, where I come from. We can talk a lot. So I censor myself.
Awesome. I'll run through the things that I found interesting then. So first one for me, and a bit of a nod to my infrastructure heritage, but there was some really useful and interesting news on networking. So many organizations have networking teams and they do networking things, and most of those people, historically, you would manage core switches and core networking on premises. I'd sort of broken that because you wind up with lots and lots of subscriptions with lots and lots of load balancers and devices in those subscriptions. And it winds up almost the app teams have to manage some of this infrastructure. And what was announced is that we can now have load balancers in separate subscriptions, which is awesome. So you can have a load balancer in subscription A, 2 workloads in subscription B, and it will load balance into that subscription, which means you can then have that tight control and that boundary, which is awesome. I thought that was really cool. Bit geeky, I'm sorry. And in the same vein, serverless GPUs is really cool, again, for containers. Instead of worrying about having machines and infrastructure accessing GPUs, you can now do it all from within containers. It's preview at the moment, so a little while before it goes GA. But again, being able to just spin up a container, access GPU, and be able to do training is a really, really awesome thing. So I'm going to watch that with a great deal of interest. And then my last thing, you're right, there's so many things, but my last one is we all know about the Key Vault, right? So Microsoft have bought in Key Vault for a while now. That's to stop devs and infrastructure people keeping passwords in plain text and doing bad things like sharing passwords and stuff, right? And keeping passwords in logs. It's just been announced that we've got secure password deployment for Edge. Now this is awesome because this is then kind of the same for your power users, let's say. So let's say you've got a team of people looking after your social media account. You have one Twitter account, not Twitter anymore, one X account, Facebook account, an Instagram
Blue
account.
Sky, if we
Yes,
follow in the trend.
Blue Sky. I did register, but I've not actually got around to using that yet. So often those teams will have one account and then that's shared amongst many. So this enables an admin to take that password, encrypt it, and automatically log in those users when they log in using a browser to the site. So they never see the password, which is really, really awesome. And, such an entry point for compromise, right? Those sort of things, because that's the things outside are always going to be attacked before the things inside. And if you get a little foothold there, then you can work your way back in. So those are really cool things.
I want to jump on that one just quickly. The last one, just David mentioned, the password is absolutely excellent. Because if you play with Hack the Box or different website to just learn cybersecurity, one of the way to easily, like the first malware you're going to create is how to read from that secure container that actually is not secure, your browser password. So that's absolutely key.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that the serverless GPU, I didn't know, so it's excellent news. You mentioned preview, and I also forgot to mention that the DSPM I talked about before was also in preview. And I forgot to talk about one small news that's a bit linked to yours. I can't find the name because I'm part of the CCP program where we do test with Microsoft. We test products in private preview, so we can't really talk about that in public. One of the products I'm testing appeared in the Ignite, and I talked to the product owner. So it's still, there's still just a bit of information that was shared. I think it's called publicly, I don't want to give the code name, but publicly is a commercial backup and restore. And it's here to help migrating from Windows 10 to Windows 11. Windows 10 is almost in end of life. There is a lot of legitimate reason people don't want to migrate to Windows 11. And one of the reasons is that the users, they want to have a smooth experience. They want their background, their settings, the time zone, etc. to be migrated. And plenty of the settings we can't really discuss. But that's Microsoft responding to that. So it's still it's in public preview for just the first phase, but just stay in tune. It will be really, really interesting in the soon future. And I'm sure one of those things would be integrated into that, David, the secure password, in the same place.
Super cool. Really interesting. Very good. Richard, you got any sort of interesting news bites that caught your eye?
No, I'm not sure it's interesting. This is go back to what we were talking before we started recording, because this was a topic that Cyrus wanted to cover, which was the Windows link, or was it the Windows 365 link, whatever, whatever the name of it is. And the reason why I thought this was interesting is purely because I've been around in IT world for way too long. And I was talking to somebody, this was before I actually knew this was being announced. I was talking to somebody at Ignite and just saying, look, this is, it's all cyclical. Everything that we were doing before is just coming back. And then I watched the keynote, and then I see this, it's a cool little bit of kit. It's a small little box for those that haven't seen it. And it's basically, I'm sure Microsoft will probably kill me for saying this. It's basically like a dumb terminal or a thin client that gives you the hardware points that you need for connecting monitors and keyboards and mouse and everything else, but then it is just streaming Windows from the cloud. So and it is in effect exactly like what we were trying to do with Citrix thin clients, 15, 20 years ago, or dare I say even sort of mainframe pieces. So I thought it was interesting. Obviously they stress the security pieces up front. I think it's $349. So again, it's not an expensive entry point. God knows what it'll be in the UK, because it'll probably be 350 quid in the UK. But it's a relatively cheap device. If you've got the infrastructure and if you can stream Windows effectively down to that device, it is a nice way of in theory, rapidly rolling out a desktop estate in a controlled manner, and in theory you get all the benefits of the service, rollback, sort of instant failover if something is happening, etc. I think that's potentially has the ability to be quite a good move for Microsoft, and I think a lot of organizations will jump on it. It just strikes me as I've seen this before.
Sun rate over anyone? Yeah. Or I guess the furthest back I went was WinFrame running over 56k modems with a Citrix client. Well, it wasn't it was a Citrix client doing that. So you're right. But I think more interestingly is it's signposting a useful device, right? But the move to cloud PCs.
Yeah.
And what the huge push that the team are doing there, the engineering team, in terms of getting cloud PC to a point where you're on parity in terms of performance and capability, in the most part, right? Because you now can have GPUs, and there are a bunch of announcements. I think on that went there for GPUs for 365 PC, and you're seeing the gradual ramp down of AVD environments, because when you're managing those things, they're more susceptible to outages and all that stuff, right? So in theory, running 365 PC gives you a better experience all up. And obviously, I don't know if you've used some of the latest clients on your machine, but it blurs now between cloud and on, if you're running a machine locally and then you connect to your 365 PC, it's, before it was really obvious, but that experience is definitely getting blurred now.
Yeah, and I mean, I know this move has been in the works for a little while now, and there was an announcement, I think last year, they were going to do something similar for Xbox as well. I think they've canned that idea, or at least it's gone very, very quiet. Can't remember what they called it, but they were talking about like a little streaming box for Xbox games that you could plug, directly into your TV. And I think so that's obviously been in the thought processes, but I'm also wondering, obviously you do have the PC plus Copilots, or Copilot plus PC, whichever way around that phrase is. But this way you're offloading a lot of that AI processing, I'm assuming, into the cloud as opposed to on the device, which gives you more power, more flexibility, more access to some of the AI tools. So we'll see how that pans out.
Very cool. How about you?
And I read a lot about this 365 link, and we know all the advantage. There's no local admin, no local storage. I mean, it's a thin client. As I said, my dad used to be interested by the podcast we're doing, so he's watching. And when I was saying that, we're going to talk about these kind of things, the Windows 365 client, and when I explained, he said, you guys are really backwards, because we had that like 40 years ago, the mainframe on the client. So it's the same advantage. It's like you don't have anything on the device. The only personal issue I have is when I used to sell AVD and the same thing came back is how do you do with internet outage and these kind of things. So that's one of the issue I see. And for me, the device is very interesting. I was really excited, but the fact that it doesn't work with third-party VDIs, Citrix, or even AVD, it limits the use case. But what else do we have today? When you do AVD, what kind of client can you buy? Normally, you have to buy a real PC for the users, or you rely on them to buy their own PC, really cheap. Even let's say a Google Chrome PC. So they use that and they can connect. So for the price, it makes sense. But I'm really keen to see what is the roadmap for this tool. Because if they can support different things, that would be really interesting.
Cool.
Absolutely. So anything else from Ignite? I mean, we'll probably repeat or re-review some of the other announcements from Ignite as we get the chance to ingest them and actually go through it all. Because I'm sure that everybody's looked at the Ignite book of news, and if that was printed on paper, it'd probably be like this thick. So there's a whole heap of stuff that has probably been hidden underneath some of the larger announcements that we'll probably want to cover and look into. But anything else from anyone on Ignite? Perfect. In which case, we can go back to the final segment that we have on the show, which is a sort of anything interesting that popped up on the news or anything interesting that we've been doing. I sort of covered mine in terms of the interesting stuff that I've been doing. Although I'm not sure going to Ignite is actually interesting. It was it was interesting in a bad way in this instance, but yeah. Otherwise, there was a couple of news stories that sort of piqued my interest over the last week or so. One of which I thought was slightly amusing, especially considering some of the announcements at Ignite about sort of patch management and how they're going to manage updates and et cetera, et cetera. So you had two snafus, for want of a better word, from Microsoft recently. So one is that they started giving people Windows Server 2025 for free as part of a botched update policy. So if people were set up, there's an article that goes into the details of it. But basically, some people have set up automatic updates. They suddenly woke up the next day with Windows 2025 Server installed on their boxes instead of whatever it was they had originally installed. And then to sort of put the icing on the cake, there was an Exchange update snafu that broke one of the rules engines around transport rules. I've forgotten the name of it now. It's really bad considering that I'm actually certified in Exchange. Anyway, yes, so it broke some transport rules, so they had to roll that.
Didn't know that.
Yeah. Patch management. And again, it was interesting, again, going back to Ignite. So one of the announcements I thought was interesting was actually a direct response to the CrowdStrike outage. So they did, well, certainly from what I've seen so far, they've not gone into too much details around what that actually is, but they've certainly been working with a lot of the sort of endpoint people. Obviously, the CrowdStrikes, I suspect, Paolo, etc. I don't know, but I'm assuming that them to actually make sure that any updates that they do in the future do not cause the same issues that impacted them with the CrowdStrike update. So there's a lot of stuff around how the kernel is being accessed or not accessed, depending on how they're going to do it. So yeah, that's a sort of tangent to those articles that I found. David, I know you found something about squirrels.
I did find something about squirrels. And I think this is it's quite interesting. At the surface, it sounds all nicey, right? So some folk have created this thing called a squirrel agent. And for those listening who are not in the UK, we've got two sorts of squirrels. We've got red squirrels, who are native to the United Kingdom. We have grey squirrels, who are imposters, and they are slowly but surely killing off all the red squirrels. So there's quite a lot of conservation work and effort going into trying to maintain the remaining populations of red squirrels. And, you know, they're all but extinct in England. There's some in Ireland and there's some in Scotland, as I understand it. So in these areas, what they're trying to do is put in place measures to help protect them, right? And one of those measures is they're using AI to identify squirrels. So you identify a grey squirrel or red squirrel. That's awesome. I don't know if you guys remember the snow leopard thing that Microsoft did a little while ago, where they were identifying snow leopards. So, you know, good use case. Obviously, you would hope the training and everything else isn't susceptible to mistakes, because buried in this article is what they're intending to use this for is to control access to food. So they're going to let red squirrels access their food. It's nice. Grey squirrels, they're going to direct them to a different set of food, but with contraception in. So they're trying to control the grey squirrel population by feeding them this food, or stop them from breeding, which is great. But, you know, the whole ethics, the safety, every single thing that probably was done to death into Ignite. I think this is a really real example of, well, if it goes wrong, it's going to go really wrong, because, you know, eventually the population will go extinct. So, what on the surface sounds like a really nice, cutesy sort of thing, actually is a really deep conversation that if you want to dig into it.
I think it is. And I mean, I know that these are much more accurate and much more sensitive, for want of a better word, than, say, my Ring spotlight cam that I have in my garden, which constantly says, someone is in your garden, and it's a leaf. or it's the dog.
No, use Unify. It will tell you if it's a human or a leaf or a scream.
Mine, I'm surprised it hasn't gone off now, but yeah, because of the wind and all the leaves are in the garden now. But yeah, the amount of alerts I get saying someone is in your garden when there's no one in the garden is worrying. But yeah, the ethics of that are an interesting conversation, aren't they? And I'm sure that there is lots of people saying, well, actually, no, that you cannot even think about doing that with the poor squirrels. But anyway,
yeah.
Just on that news, when you posted that yesterday on the team chat, I was really happy you posted that, because it's weird, but 15 years ago when I was in Canada, in Montreal, if we have an audience in Montreal, they can confirm, in the Parc Mont-Royal, which is a big park, there's plenty of these squirrels, and there's a lot of fight between the red squirrel and the gray one. And actually, the red one are really passive, and the gray one are very aggressive, and also they're not native. Yeah. And I didn't know it was subject, but I saw students from sociology school or whatever, they were studying the behaviors, and they tried to find a solution how to preserve those. So they always said, don't feed the gray squirrels. And I always thought it was really weird. I said, squirrel is squirrel. And actually, this is a big subject. Because actually, if you don't do anything, the red one, they don't fight back. Yeah. They're going extinct. And it's really interesting. And when I saw that news, I'm so happy that someone, somewhere, said, I'm going to use AI to solve that problem. And that is, it's every day we have this kind of news, and that for me, they're my favorite news. Sorry, I get passionate about that, but it's more than a squirrel problem. It's how to solve a population problem with AI.
Yeah, it's awesome. I did have another one. We got time? Can I go for
we've got time.
Yeah, go on. And again, I thought this was really, really interesting. So we've now got quantum computers in the mix, right? We've got classical computers, which is the things that we're all using right now. And Microsoft Research are looking at something called an optical computer. Awesome. So it doesn't really do the same things that a classical computer does, but imagine all your transistor gates. Instead of transistors, you've got optical switches going on and off, doing your binary. So you can do it at the speed of light. It's really, really cool. So you can have a computer running at the speed of light, which, like, the geek and the sci-fi geek in me is just absolutely loving this. Now, they're saying it's targeted more obviously at sort of machine learning and sort of that those sort of workloads rather than a day-to-day. But I really want to see an optical computer come to fruition, because I think, you know, they were saying like orders of magnitude quicker than existing computers. So is that then a bridge, you know, where quantum is too expensive, too complicated? Could optical then fill a niche? Yeah,
quite possibly. I mean, I do need to read up more on quantum, because it is a subject that is going to become more important. However, what I think sort of understood is that it's very good for some workloads.
yes.
And I'm probably wrong saying this, so correct me, whatever, write comments saying I'm an idiot. It also doesn't necessarily give you a definitive answer. It doesn't say this is the answer. It can give you sort of probabilities of answers, and you sort of have to go and figure out what's going on with that. It's the whole quantum stuff.
Oh, go on. Sorry. Go on.
No, sorry. It's just about that subject. My mom offered my babies a book, and there's like plenty of different concepts, and one of them is called, and just if anyone listen here, just type quantum physics for babies. That book explains quantum physics better than anything I've seen. And actually that blur you said is explained really well. And just have a look. But yes, that news with the optical PC mixed with quantum could be like a...
Yes. Yeah. I tried to read once Hawkins, I can't remember if it was The Brief History of Time or the one that he did after that. And I got about a chapter in and went, and then put it down and never picked it back up again.
Yeah. And I was going to say, it's probably more than just probability, right? Because there was other interesting news where people are claiming that they managed to break encryption, right?
Yeah.
Using
54.
quantum. It's really good for sort of life sciences, and the things they're getting out that, you know, are tangible things that they're able to action, right? And I think it's the interaction between the quantum computer and classical that they use to then control the quantum, and I think there's some magic that works in between, for sure. But yeah, and the scaling of the what the logical qubits. You know, and that seems to be growing exponentially as the years go on. You know, when I think back to when I was at Microsoft a few years ago, and it was just this fledgling thing, somebody trying to just get a qubit working. And, you know, now Microsoft's got a new partnership with, I forget the company name.
Atom something,
yeah. With a whole bunch of stable qubits. It's an awesome space.
Yeah. Yes, that was the term that came up at the end of Satch's keynote, was reliable. Was it reliable qubits? I think that was the term that came up, and I was watching that going, okay, I know what a qubit is. Well, actually, I don't know what a qubit is, but at least I know what the term is. I'm now going to have to go and figure out what they mean by reliable qubit.
Qubit in the baby books again. You have 0 and 1, so the ball can be blue or red. That's how I explain to babies, and the qubit can be any color you want. So that's kind of all the positioning.
Well, it's Schrodinger's cat, isn't it? In effect, the cat can be in any state, and until you open the box and look at it, that's when the waveform collapses, and then it becomes whatever state it needs to be.
There's multiple states, but for the cat, it was dead or alive.
Yeah.
For the what you said, David, about the breaking the RSA key, there's recently news about China. They developed their own qubit computers, and there was a lot of news that said, "Oh, they broke the RSA key." They did, but they didn't. It's a 22-bit RSA key, and it's still a huge step forward because they still break it.
Yeah.
But normally the RSA key is at least 2048 bits. But it's going to happen. I'm personally convinced it's going to happen. It's like what you said in Microsoft. They were talking about this concept, and now it's happening. It's like fusion, nuclear reactions. The stable one it's happening.
Yeah. There you go. That was mine. Thank you.
Excellent. Cyrus, anything from you?
I'll go really fast. So there's 3 small things, and I'm going to probably say 2. Thomas Kurtz, he was the co-creator of the basic language. He recently passed away, the 12th of November. I thought it was good to mention. He used to develop the basic language, and with another owner, they developed also the Dartmouth time-sharing system. It's basically used to simplify mainframe multi-user interaction. So I thought it was good to talk about him. On a different note, there's the project X-Ray. So this is how it's called. It's it's developed by some Harvard University students. But in the background, I'm sure they use something called a PIM-EYES. So if anyone here can use Google to just type PIM-EYES. If you don't know what it is, PIM-EYES is a project. I don't think it's open source, but it's a project developed by 2 brothers. And basically it's to give a unique value for each faces. So the space between your eyes, your nostrils, your face, doesn't matter if you have beard or not, if you have hair or not, you always have the same face, and you have a vector values for the face. So if I just take a screenshot of your face, I put it in that tool, and I can see easily where your face appears online based on those values. And that works really well. For the anecdote, I used to, it was like 15 years ago, I was with someone in Paris that I don't want to be seen anymore. And that person and I, we were interviewed by a random, journalist. And for like 2 minutes, they asked us a question. I forgot about that. I tested the tool with my wife. I put my picture. I had a big beard. And at that time, I did not have a beard. I was completely shaved. And that tool recognized me and find a thumbnail of YouTube of where that video was from. And it was in Indonesia. So it was Indonesian journalist in a random video that have like 40 views, and it discovered that. So that project X-Ray, the students, they said, okay, let's leverage that tool. And they used the Meta's glass, the Ray-Ban glass with the camera. And by just talking to people on the street, and I can see that on TikTok, on Instagram, they talk to people on the street in Germany. And they just look at them for a few seconds. They say, hello, how are you? Can you stop a second? Is your name Anna something? And the person says, yes. Oh, you work in this company? And she says, yes. Why did you bet? And they try that with like 10 or 15 people, and it works.
Wow.
So private life is a story of the past for everyone. And the last news, I'm going to be really fast on that one, is just for fun. So I will mention the name World of Warcraft. And yes, it's a Microsoft product now. It's owned by Microsoft. And so it was released in 2004. It's 20 years ago. And the average base players in that time was 22, 23 years. And because it was 20 years ago, now the average player base is 43 years. Because the people who played that game when they were young, now they're in their 40s or 50s. So if you're in that age, I'm sure that ring a bell. They just released the original server as it was in the past. They tried that 6 years ago, but they tried again now. So if you always wanted to try that game, you can try now, and you can develop your skills also in the management and leadership. If you manage a raid of 40 people, I can tell you that you're going to suffer. Everyone is not happy. They want their specific loot. You have to manage like a recruitment. You have to manage planning. People leaving at the last minute, coming back, sick, internet problem. So my wife always said that I thought you were playing, but I can see you arguing and call it a game. And that's a game. That's really fun.
Very good.
And that's it for me.
Excellent. Thank you, Cyrus. Yeah, unfortunately, I did try World of Warcraft, but I couldn't quite get into it all those years ago. So Luckily, because otherwise the age would have gone up for the latest players. Excellent. So we've reached. Actually, we're over where we
Yeah.
planned to be, but hey, that's fine. If you, I have to do this. I think it's an obligatory. It's part of the sort of terms and conditions, I think, of uploading onto YouTube. So if you liked the content, please feel free to like it, hit the bell notification, and subscribe. Leave a comment. Please, any feedback is appreciated, and will be incorporated into the next episode. And at that point, I would just say thank you for watching, and have a good rest of the week or whatever it is until we speak next.
Great stuff. Thank you, guys.
And see you soon. Maybe in World of Warcraft.
Maybe on World of Warcraft. Thanks, everyone.